In every single program at Amara, we are working to keep families connected and together. We center relationships. And as you'll hear from our panelists today, we focus on advancing racial and LGBTQIA equity because of the disproportionate impact that foster care has on people with those identities. So now to start this conversation, I am thrilled to introduce you to Nicole Mazen, Amara's Chief Program and Policy Officer and our facilitator today. In her role, Nicole works closely with our teams that provide foster care and kinship care support to families. Nicole is also our lead policy officer and works closely with our partners such as the Department of Children, Youth and Families and with other nonprofit partners and the state. So to ensure that Amara is a key partner in impacting systemic change in Washington, our programs are important and Nicole's work is critical. Nicole, please take it away.
Thanks, Scarlett. I'm really excited to be here with all of you today to take a deeper look at foster care in our community and how Amara has evolved in our approach to ensure well-being for the entire foster care triad, which includes kids in care, their family, and their foster caregivers. Before we dive into our discussion with our panelists, I want to provide some context for our conversation, including common definitions and some data about child welfare in Washington. Let's start with a look at the kids who are coming into foster care. Right now, there are more than 400,000 youth in foster care across the country. And in Washington, there are approximately 6,500 kids in care. You can see on this slide that the number of kids in foster care has steadily declined in recent years. This is true both for our state and the country as a whole. Sometimes people are surprised to learn the ages of children in foster care. In our state, just about 70% of kids in care are under the age of 10. Although we are seeing that in recent months, older youth are coming into care at higher rates. And this is why age really matters when we're thinking about having the right placements for kids. Lastly, I want to touch on the racial demographics for youth in foster care. Like many systems, Black, Indigenous youth of color are overrepresented in foster care. Black children are 2 times more likely, and Native American children are 3 times more likely to enter foster care than white children. Ultimately, the fact that children of color are more likely to be removed from their home, stay in foster care longer, and are less likely to return home is something we pay attention to a lot at Amara. And it's a problem that we feel we all have the responsibility to address and remedy. In our organization's work to transform the foster care system and prioritize the well-being of kids and families, we spend a lot of effort making sure there are caregivers who are well prepared to support children as they come into foster care. A couple of terms you'll hear today are foster caregivers and kinship caregivers, and there is a difference. Foster caregivers, also known as foster families or foster parents, are licensed caregivers who are unlikely to be known to a child prior to that youth being placed in their home. Kinship caregivers are family members like grandpa, auntie, or a cousin, or other people who have an existing relationship to a child like a coach or a neighbor, and who have been approved to care for a child in foster care. The kinship caregiver is likely not licensed prior to the youth's placement in their care. Our state does a much better job than most to place kids with their family members. Currently, about 41% of children in foster care are in traditional foster caregiver placement, and 41% are also in kinship caregiver placements. Next, I want to make sure I share a little bit about placement stability and why it's so important for children in foster care. Placement stability and its inverse, placement disruptions, looks at the number of times a child moves homes while in foster care. Stable placements are critical for youth while they're in foster care, and it's something we work with foster families on, which you'll hear more about in our conversation. Nationally, kids in foster care average 4.4 moves for every 1,000 days, But in our state, we're seeing that kids have nearly 6 moves for every 1,000 days. And at Amara, youth have less than 2 moves for every 1,000 days in care. We'll go into more depth with our panelists about the positive impact stable placements have for kids and how Amara is working with families to avoid disruptions whenever possible. Lastly, I want to make sure everyone on this call knows what we mean when we talk about reunification. Simply put, reunification is when kids successfully exit the foster care system to return home to their family. In 2019, 62% of kids who exited foster care in Washington state reunified with their families, a much higher rate than the national rate of 47%. In order to best support caregivers in their work within foster care, Amara's foster care program provides wraparound supports, which include preparation for fostering through the state system, navigating the state licensing process, learning about the unique needs of youth and families in foster care, support in navigating their growing partnership with parents and youth, navigating uncertain and unpredictable times, and connecting with the fostering community, and more. All of this is done to ensure that caregivers have the support they need to provide safe, stable, and loving environments for youth. And also so the youth's parents can know that their children are safe so that they can focus on what is required of them and their children in order for them to return to their care. We know that anyone can be a caregiver if they're open and willing to learn. We also know that we all need support and community to be strong caregivers. And so organizations like Amara are necessary to provide this support so that caregiving foster families can return to caring for additional children and become the seasoned and skilled foster parents that youth and families need. Whew, that was a lot of info, and I kind of sped through that, but I think we're all really here to hear from our panelists. So I want to turn to our panel, and I'd like to give them the opportunity to introduce themselves. Brenda, why don't you start? And I'd love it if you could share your name, your pronouns, what your role is, and how long you've been involved in child welfare.
Thanks, Nicole. My name is Brenda Bobadilla. My pronouns are she, her. I've been working in child welfare for about 9 years. And what else did you ask? Sorry about that.
You did it. That was
great.
perfect.
Okay.
Anne, how about you go next?
My name is Ann Holloway. I'm a foster care specialist at Amara. My pronouns are she, her. I've been with Amara for 15 years, and I've been working in the child welfare realm for about 20.
So, Erin, I'll kick it to you.
Hi, I'm Erin Burkholter. I am a foster parent with Amara. Megan and I have been working with Amara since 2014, and we have had 4 kids placed with us, and 3 of them have reunified home since our time there.
And I'm Megan Walker. I use she, her pronouns.
Oh, and he, him. Yeah.
Thank you. And April.
Good afternoon. My name is April Rivera. I use she, her pronouns. I work for the King County CASA program as a staff attorney, and I first became involved with child welfare when I started volunteering as a CASA in 2005.
Awesome. Well, thank you all so much and welcome. Thank you for your time and your expertise, and I'm really looking forward to this conversation. And April, I'd love to start with you. As an attorney who works with child-appointed special advocates across King County, as well as families involved in the child welfare system, would you just share a little bit more about what is it that brings kids and families into foster care in our state?
Yes, absolutely. And being an attorney, I thought we should start with the law and just sort of the plain language of it. Our statute defines a dependent child as one who's been abandoned, one who's been abused or neglected, or, and this is the most common catchment that we use, has no parent capable of adequately caring for the child, so that the child's in a circumstance which constitutes a danger of substantial damage to the child's psychological or physical development. And that's what we have to prove at trial if we're supporting dependency. The statute also goes on to define in more specificity abuse and neglect. And I think I'm going to focus more on the neglect because the vast majority of the children that come into care because of neglect allegations. And the statute says that neglectful treatment is an act or a failure to act, or the cumulative effects of a pattern of conduct of behavior or inaction, evidencing a serious disregard of consequences of such magnitude as to constitute a clear and present danger to a child's health, welfare, or safety. So that's kind of a lot to unpack, but clearly it's the pattern of the parent's inability to meet the child's basic needs. But the statute goes on to say that specifically, we are not to automatically assume that there's neglect if we can show that the reasons are based on poverty, homelessness, or exposure to domestic violence. And I think that sometimes it's a little bit confusing for lay people to not think that those things are important factors in constituting the neglectful behaviors of the parents. And it's not that we can't look at them at all and the impact they have. I mean, if a parent is in repeated, for example, domestic violence relationships and exposing the children to themselves being hurt by multiple partners, that's something we would certainly bring up in a trial. But we can't do it based solely because the father is beating up the mother, for example. We couldn't remove the children based on that. We need to help the mother show protective capacity and try to brainstorm with her ways to keep the children safe. So what does a pattern of conduct look like? Well, I mean, the sort of the obvious things, right? So the children are missing school a lot. That's a common reason that we get CPS referrals. When during COVID, there was less reporting. Certainly, I feel like this is anecdotal, but since kids are back in school, we're getting a lot more referrals from schools. Children showing up with unexplained bumps and bruises. Children who are, there are programs for children to get free breakfast, for example, at school. And so if the children are showing up hungry and they're not enrolled in the breakfast program, like what's the reasoning for that? Is there a parent that's capable of helping the child to enroll in that program? Like, why are we not seeing the parent involved in these things? And I think the issue of disproportionality in my mind does intertwine with class. The vast majority of the families that we work with are coming from poverty, and we're kind of seeing them on their worst day, right? And so when you look at that, and then you look at the contacts that families, particularly of Brown and Black families, are having with the system, where they're sort of this repeated negative interaction. And we know from many studies that, for example, when children go to the hospital, that a family who brings in a child who's been injured that's Brown or Black has a much higher chance of getting a CPS referral than a white family with similar circumstances. I mean, these studies have stayed true throughout time. Or if you're living in an apartment building with a lot of neighbors, there's more chance that you're going to have a CPS call on you because your child is crying and screaming than, for instance, if you're in a single house where there's no joined walls, right? There's just all these circumstances where I feel like it leads families to have more contact with the department. And of course, the department is a good record keeper overall. So every time someone makes a CPS call, there's this, then becomes the CPS history of this family that we then use against them, when we're in court. And so when I'm advising my CASAs, we try to really untangle that and try to advise them to brainstorm with us, what impact has the parents' class or the parents' race had on their contacts with the department that have been negative, and how we have to independently look at those interactions and try to assess whether it was a safety risk. At some point, of course, there are safety risks, and that's why we're here. That's what my job is to help advise my clients and advocate for the children's best interest in court. But we do need to be very conscious of the background of how the children came to our attention.
Absolutely. Thank you, April. And I wonder if you could share a little bit about what the purpose and the goal of foster care is, given everything that April just shared.
Yeah, sure. So foster care is meant to be a place for children to stay temporarily when family isn't available, while their parents prepare to welcome them back home. It's meant to be a temporary solution to a temporary problem. And so reunification is always the first goal and should be the main goal of children in foster care and what everyone is working towards. During the process, during a dependency, it's the state's job to support the parents in making whatever changes that are necessary to demonstrate that they can safely parent their children A lot of times this is access to services. There's a lack of services in our area for people. There's long wait lists. And so it's really that support that the family needs to make those changes that are necessary for the children to be returned to them.
Great, thank you, Anne. Erin and Megan, I'd love to turn to you next. What got you interested in becoming foster parents, and what brought you to Amara?
You know, it initially, I mean, for a long time, it had been something that had been on my mind, you know, prior to Megan and I getting together. And then it was actually, as I was a newspaper reporter at the Skagit Valley Herald, and I was invited to come cover an adoption day. And it, of course, was like, you know, balloons and cake, and everything was like just very exciting. And we were like, well, this looks just, you know, this just looks wonderful. Why aren't we doing this? And it was a special day for the people involved, but obviously was not a good indicator of what really fostering is like. So we had reached out to Amara. We had gone to an info session, and then decided we weren't quite ready, took a little bit more time, and then came back. And for us, I think one of the biggest moments for us, because we were already in the trainings, but I think one of the biggest moments for us was in the core training that we were taking and coming into a session, and someone described to us exactly what Anne had just described to us, is like what the role of a foster parent actually is. And the way they described it then was to facilitate reunification with the family. And we got into our car after that, and we were kind of just sitting there taking that in, and went, we have to change our expectations. Like, if we're going to do this, this isn't what we thought it was. This isn't a way to get a child. That I think a lot of people find themselves coming into the situation with that in mind. And it didn't, you know, I could also see a lot of people getting scared away at that point, and it didn't for us. It didn't scare us away, but it did. I think that was the moment when we were like, okay, we're going to be foster parents. And that altered kind of our mindset for how we go forward.
I think for Amara, it was really important to us that Amara welcomes all families and all different configurations of parents. That's a value that's really important to us. We also really appreciated that at all of the trainings and meetings and info session type things we went to, we got a chance to hear from foster and adoptive parents. And so really being able to hear and connect with people who have had that lived experience has been really valuable for us as well.
Great. You know, I think of the two of you as really what I would call successful foster parents. And I'm curious if you could share maybe what are some of the things that you see in yourselves and that you see in your community that really sets people up to be great foster parents?
I mean, it starts with love and time. If you've got enough love to give on a kid, and you've got the time and flexibility in your life that you can take a little time off when you have a kid with you and do the, you know, there's the logistics piece of it. But I think a lot of people, I think the other thing is a commitment to minimizing the harm on children, because a lot of people will say, oh, I couldn't be a foster parent because I couldn't say goodbye, or I would get too attached. And I just, for a long time, have flipped that and said, it's not the kid's fault that they're here and that they're having this happen to them. And I would so much rather I suffer the broken attachment than the kid suffer a broken attachment. Or a kid, you know, we've gone through 2 reunifications, and those are really, really hard. But I would never rather have a child in a home that didn't love them that much for the amount of time that they were with us. And so if you have a willingness to prioritize, you know, and really feel like it's important to minimize harms to children, and you've got some love and some flexibility, I think those are the big things that I've found.
You know, relying on your community to help, especially when something's unexpected. Say you suddenly have a 9-month-old and you weren't expecting to have a 9-month-old and you are not equipped, and you have 2 kids in your house trying to get to know your bio daughter, you know, blasting out to like friends and family, like, we need bottles, we need diapers, we need, you know, being able to like, I have such a hard time asking for help. Like, you know, whenever people are like, what can we do? You seem pretty slammed. I'm like, I don't know. But this really has taught us how to, you know, build the supports. And then I would say the other things that was been really successful for us is being connected with other foster parents, because there's not many other people. It can get really exhausting talking with people about the fostering experience. People come with a lot of preconceived notions. You end up like wanting to be like, wow, well, this week was really long because we're dealing with kind of this thing. And they're like, well, yeah, isn't that the way with fostering? And then they all of a sudden they're spewing all of their nonsense about fostering, and you're like, well, now I can't let that go unsaid, and now I have to put all my energy into like correcting myths you have about foster care, instead of just being like, I've had a long week. And so having foster parents that you can talk to, who instantly know, who you can say, we've got a hearing coming up, and they're like, oh, yep, hearings, we know what that means. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I hear flexibility and openness and actually using your supports and setting yourself aside, which sounds like things that anyone can do. So thank you so much. I imagine that a lot of people are curious about what those first few weeks are like when a youth is removed from their parents' care and placed into foster care. And I'd love to hear from each of you what it's like from your perspective. So Megan, I'd love to start with you.
So there's a lot of moving pieces that happen when a new kiddo comes into our home. There's logistical pieces, and there's kind of safety, emotional pieces as well. So from logistics, you have to get doctor's appointments and dentist appointments, and get the established with local care providers. We have a visit schedule that we're having to manage with a visit supervisor, getting to know the state social worker, and having a lot of visits from state and Amara social workers. So there's kind of that piece. There's a lot of people checking up on you and making sure you're okay. And then from the child side, one of the things that I found really valuable learning at some of the trainings that we've been to is the concept of felt safety. That our home is physically safe for a child. We have been deemed by the state, we're licensed, so we know that it's safe. But a child coming into our home has to feel safe. And what each child needs to feel safe is unique to them. And so it's some of getting to know, do they need to sleep with a light on? Do they want to be on a top bunk, or do they want to be close to the ground? Do they have any kind of special snugglies, or do they want a special snuggly? What are their comfort foods? What kinds of things do they like to do during the day? We also try and do a lot of physical activity, because kids are going through a lot of fight or flight. They're going through toxic stress when they are removed from their family and put into a new family. And so the more we can keep them physically moving, helping that move through their bodies and helping them kind of settle in. So those are some of the big things. I mean, it's getting to know a new little human and what they need and how we can all be together.
I think the only other thing I'd add that was really good, but I would add is kind of like, there's kind of a microcultural thing that's happening right here, which is you're basically combining 2 families and 2 family cultures into the space at one time. And that has everything to do with like, how do we all sit at the table and eat? Like, what are kind of the rules? You can kind of see, we've seen kids at our table where something happens and they kind of look at us like, wait, that you just allowed that to happen. Or on the flip side, on like, shouldn't this happen? I have this expectation. And so I think there's just a lot on these really kind of subtle ways of figuring out how do we all rub up against each other, and how do we sort that out. And I think for the foster parents, a lot of it is figuring out how much can you kind of adopt that culture and bring that into the home, and not just forcing the kid to live the way your family lives and behave the way your family behaves.
Yeah, thank you. You guys are thinking about a lot of things and doing a lot of things in those first 2 weeks. And Brenda, I'd love to hear from you as a foster care specialist. What are the things that you're thinking about and paying attention to in those first few weeks? I imagine it's some similarities and some differences.
Yes, just like they mentioned, there's a lot going on. It's like a roller coaster of emotions that they're feeling. It's all about normalizing what they're feeling. It doesn't matter if it's their first placement or their fifth. There's a lot of things that they're going to be prepared for, and some they're like, what should I do? So it's our job as a foster care specialist to be with them, to support them, to remind them of certain things that, oh, you're right, I forgot to do this. And also just to help them to feel like everything's going to be okay. I know as foster parents, their goal is to make sure, like they said, that the kids are safe, that they feel supported. And also as our job, it's to make them feel supported as well. So if the foster parents feel well, then the kids will also see that. So it's a whole bunch of just teamwork, support system, which is what we are here for, to help everything, the whole entire process. So.
Thanks, Brenda. And April, I'd love to hear from you as well, because I think we've got 3 different positionalities here. And what are the first couple of weeks like for you and for your team?
I'm sorry. Could you state the question a little more directly?
Yeah, sorry. What is it that you're really paying attention to and thinking about in those first few weeks when a child is coming into care, when their family is first touching the child welfare system?
And so for our CASAs, we're trying to get them to sort of jump quickly into speaking to all the collaterals and the important adults in the children's lives, as well as meeting the children and trying to establish some type of a relationship. A little bit, been a little bit more complicated by Zoom, but visits are starting to resume in person again. And trying to make sure that whoever's taking care of the children has the supports they need. I think it's difficult. We find that there's not, information sharing is complicated. The dependency cases are confidential by law, and it's easy to understand why. And so there's sort of division between what foster parents get to know and then sort of what's going on with the legal case. But for instance, sometimes we find out that foster parents, not from Amara, but are unclear on the where the case is in the legal process. And so they may think that they're the child's first placement when maybe they're the child's third or fourth. And so there are some things that the CASA can share, I think, that can give the foster parents some information. I thought it was interesting when the foster parents were talking. We've been talking a lot about transracial adoption at CASA recently, just it's come up in a variety of areas. And I think this is an issue of transracial foster placements as well that we're talking about more openly. And are there things that we as the CASA program can help? I mean, sort of the obvious things are, advising, finding a resource for someone to do black hair. If they're a white family, they may not know how to take care of a child's black hair or skin, things like this. But there's a whole realm of ways that we can keep children connected in communities, even while they're in stranger foster care. And so these are all, the children's needs are the primary focus at the very beginning, I would say.
Thanks, April. Yeah, I mean, it sounds like really getting to know the child and their family, the caregivers, and connecting people with resources. I mean, even Amara families get confused and overwhelmed by the court system and what that process looks like. So that's a really important role. I mean, I know I get confused by it, and I've seen lots of different templates about what to expect next. So thanks for sharing that. And you have been at Amara for a while. For over 15 years, and you've really seen this transformation from being a more adoption focused organization to a foster care organization that helps families build relationships with a child's family and supports reunification whenever possible. I'd love to hear from you what that transition in our approach and philosophy has been like and how you've seen it impact kids and families.
Sure, yes. So I'm going to be totally honest here. I came to Amara after working in foster care because I saw kids who needed to be adopted, or I felt like kids needed to be adopted. It's not up to me, but so Amara was a good landing place for me. However, as I've grown, and I think as Amara has grown, we've come to realize that reunification And being with a child being with their family is always in the child's best interest, as long as it's safe and appropriate. There was a time that Amara believed that an attachment disruption was the worst thing that we could do to kids. An attachment disruption would be a child's attached to their foster parents. So why would we want to disrupt that and reunify a child with their family? What we have learned, what I have learned, what Amara has learned, and what we've had lots of conversations about for the last 7-8 years, is that we can transfer attachment. So whatever attachment the child has with their foster parents, we can help transfer that attachment to their parents. And this is where transitions are very important. Transitioning the child, it all depends on the needs of the child, the age of the child, but working as a team with the child's parents, with the foster parents, with the social worker, with the CASA program, with any other person or entity who's involved in the case, talking about how can we transfer this attachment from the foster parents who are caring for them 24 hours a day back to their parents so it's successful. And we've learned, reunification is very important and it's necessary. It's necessary for the child and the child's identity development. And we do understand that there is harm in removal of children from their families. It's harmful to their families and to any of those who witness that removal. And so I think the important thing to think about is that we need to resolve that harm or help that in terms of the reunification. We also now talk about how do we even prevent removals? And I know that April probably talks about this a lot in her group, but that's the question. That's like the $1 million question. And I know at Amara, we are helping guide that work through innovative programming, a lot of work that Nicole is doing, and through working with our foster families who help parents reunify with their children and to help them build lasting community supports.
Thanks, Anne. I'm going to put you on the spot again for just a second. I wonder, I love how you talked about transferring attachment and kind of how that's about transitions, and transitions are important. There we go. Garbling my words. I wonder if you could maybe share an example or some examples of how to do that, because I think making it kind of concrete for people could be really helpful.
Yeah, so every case is going to look different, of course. I worked with older kids, where they haven't, basically the longer transition plan that we've had actually does more harm. So we might get together and say, in 2 weeks, we're going to move this child home to their parents, and basically just spending more and more time with their parents through those 2 weeks. For a younger child, it could be a month. It could be starting to spend more time at the parents' house, maybe start some overnights. I love it when foster families bring the parents into their home to show this is actually this is our nighttime routine. This is how we do things. This is what the child is used to. And I've actually had some foster parents who go into the parents' home and is there maybe at the first bedtime. It really all depends. It's child dependent and dependent upon the needs and what the team agrees is what is most important.
Thank you so much, Anne. I think it just really helps to solidify for people to hear some specific examples. So that was great. Erin, I'd love to turn to you. You've been part of this transition as well, because you and Megan have been working with us for a while. And I'm just so curious about what you've seen and how this has changed your own approach, or what, if you have had any changes in your approach to fostering, and what has driven that.
In terms of especially a transition and return to home, I think on a more of a philosophical, emotional level, one of the things that it did for me is it changed my own perception of myself and who I am and what my role is. it's really easy. Like when you become a parent for a kid for a long time, you get like really invested in them, and you get really invested as like being their father. And it took me a while to kind of come to the understanding that it's not my story, it's their story. And this is not my journey, it's their journey. And I get to be lucky enough to be along for the ride for quite a bit of that. And so it's helped me kind of think about things in terms of like, what is my role now and what can I do now that can be supportive? So when they were here, my role was to like be as much like a supportive father as I could be. And now that they're not, my role is to be as much of a supportive adult in their life and someone to remind them that I've known them for a long time and how much I care about them and how special they are. So that they can hear that from as many adults. With parents, I mean, I remember hanging out with first parent we did a reunification with, and we were just like awkwardly trying to talk about information that we wanted to pass, because you've seen things and I've seen things and you know things and I know things and I want to exchange information. And it was so awkward for both of us as we were talking about this. And it took us a little while we finally realized that we just had to lean in that we had to accept the fact that this was like how the world threw us at each other. And there's no changing that, and let's just go for it. And we text all the time now about anything. Which is really great. And then I would say the one thing I would add is in our first placement, it's a little bit of a long story, but there was a lot of people had a lot of opinions about what was going to happen. Like from day one, we were told, this is not going to reunify. There's no way, this and that. And then I think it was every 3 to 6 months, the story would change, like completely in ways that you would not imagine. Like in one way, they'd be like, well, one of them might reunify, but the other one might not. We took a lot of advice from people on how to do with that. And a lot of the advice was, don't talk with the parents right now. They're not in a good place and you don't want to be around them. So for our second one, we said, we're done with that. We've got thick skins, we can handle this. And so from basically day one, the social worker placing our second placement with us, we were like, so we're going to do we didn't even ask. We were like, we're going to do a drop off with parents for a visit, and we'd like to know when do you think that would be appropriate. But just like leaning in on this is going to happen. We have to have a relationship with the parents. And that was one I think was really important, because if we had left it too long, I think it could have been a lot harder for us to go with it if we couldn't just throw ourselves in front of them right at the get-go to say, we're here, we're foster parents. We're here to support in whatever way we can, and we want to give her the best home that we can while you're, getting whatever you need to get done. So I'm rambling now.
And I would say two other things that were really important in helping us kind of make that transference. So I was a high school science teacher, and I witnessed multiple kids. I started to notice a pattern that right around somewhere between 9th and 10th grade, a lot of my students who lived with one parent would start to try and pursue contact with their other parent. And it didn't really matter what that parent had done in their life before or not done. It was really, really important to them to have contact with that missing parent. And I got to see several different examples of that going different degrees of successful depending on how open the parents were. So I kind of had that knowledge that even if a kid, when they're 4, doesn't want to go home, like there will be a point in their development where they are going to acknowledge that loss. And that is going to be really significant to them. And then with our first placement, there were 2 kids, one was a baby and one was a little older. And our older kiddo taught me so much about attachment to parents, because she, once we finally got to see her with her mom, there was something in her that did not relax until she was with her mom. And it didn't matter how hard it was, and it didn't matter how much work mom had to do, and it didn't matter what mom had done and not done to protect her. There was something in her that was wound really tight and only let go when she was with her mom. And so that was a really valuable, that was getting to witness that and have that experience with her was really powerful for us in transforming as well. That the only way we could see adopting a child is if we could look them in the eyes and say, there is absolutely no way, we tried everything and there was no way that your parent could keep you safe. And so unless we've tried everything, then reunification is the path that we need to be traveling.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, it's so, I wish that what you are describing wasn't unique and that this was what foster care always looked like. And it's so clear to me that you have such a strong understanding of why that relationship matters and that it falls to you to maintain or rebuild, create that relationship if it isn't there. So I just want to say thank you. And that, you know, what we're really trying to do at Amara is to support families like you to make sure that this becomes normal, typical, every day. And that's really what, I mean, foster care could be a positive experience in a very challenging time if every foster home was like yours. April, I'd love to just hear from you if there's anything that you want to add of just kind of what you've seen in the last decade. I imagine this shift is not unique at Amara, and kind of what you've seen in your work as we've shifted and what you hope to see into the future.
Yeah, I think Amara has been a leader in some of these areas about having contact, for example, between foster parents and biological families. I can think of multiple cases on my caseload where that's been true. And clearly for the children, it's better. I think it's a challenging, or at least it's new territory in terms of navigating that relationship, like Erin and Megan were talking about. And I think I could imagine that foster parents would need some support in navigating that relationship at various times. And so it's good you guys are there. Certainly, you know, the statute really hasn't changed all that much, but the way that it's applied has changed. The CASA program too, I think, has changed its modeling. We also, I certainly, 15 years ago, argued attachment as the reason to keep children, with a foster home that they'd been with for a few years versus, in particular, not a parent, but placement with a relative. And I think, one, that I wouldn't make that same argument today. And also I think I would lose. And so I think we all have been educated, this is social engineering to some degree. And so it's played, sort of society's expectations have changed with the recognition that children receive so many benefits from being placed with their parents, but also even with extended family members. And so we have a lot more placements with family members, often over the objection of the department, where we have to sort of navigate that, how to work that out. And I have found that foster parents' ability to have and maintain relationships with extended family members also makes a huge difference for the children, so that they're not losing all of their contact just because they were removed from their parents. They still have grandparents and aunties and uncles and cousins. And again, I find that Amara, compared to some of the other agencies, really has been a leader in that as well, and really looking at the full supports that children need when they're in care. Megan's story really struck me. I was a staff guardian ad litem for 7 years, so I was going and meeting with children individually. And I had a case where there was a brand new baby. She was 3 weeks old, and she was removed from her mother at the hospital and hadn't seen her mother in 3 weeks. And I don't remember now if it was because the department didn't provide the visit or if the mother wasn't available for visits. But I was holding her at the MLK office, and multiple adults had walked in and out, and she was just sort of laying there, a little lump. I mean, she couldn't really do much yet. But her mother walked in and she heard her mother's voice, that she hadn't seen for 3 weeks. And that little tiny baby's whole head and body reached for her mother. And it really made a huge impact on me, and sort of, that we need to honor children's relationships with their parents. And it may be that their parent isn't safe right now, or may not be safe long-term for permanency, but that's a relationship that's important to the children. And so I think all of us acknowledging that, and the court's emphasis on it, it really is just doing what the statute says, which is that reunification is our primary goal.
Thank you, April. So I have 2 more questions, and this has just been such a great conversation, and I don't want to stop it, but I also know that there's questions in the chat that I want to get to as well. So my second to last question is for everyone, and I'd love to hear from each of you, from your perspectives and your unique roles, how you approach helping children reunify with their families. What is that experience like for you, and what is it that you do? And Anne, I'd love to start with you.
I'm now like racking my brain to think of what I do. I see my primary role as supporting the foster parents, because that's the people that I work the most closely with. I'm definitely there to support the parents. I'm definitely there to support the department, DCYF. And I'm also there to support the children, and I'm in the home every month. Some cases it's a little bit more than that. It just all depends on what's going on, but it's basically to support them to whatever is needed. If the foster parents just need to talk, or if the kids want to talk about something, to help guide the foster parents conversation with them. I attend transition meetings where we talk about how are we going to transition this child. I make sure that all the service providers are involved, whether it's, a therapist or an infant mental health therapist, early intervention services, because those are also important people in the child's life that should have a voice in that. And then if there's anything else identified by the team, I'm always willing to do that, because I want to make this as successful as possible. And what is the experience like for me? I would have to say, I'm always, even though in a lot of cases I don't know the parents, I may have met them once or twice in these days via Zoom. I'm always very proud of them, because throughout the life of a case, you can see how much they've changed. I've always been able to see how much they love their kids, and I can only imagine the feeling that they have of, now I actually have my children back. I'm also very proud of my foster parents. I mean, reunifications aren't easy. Even in the easiest cases, they aren't easy. And I know how much they love these children, and transferring that attachment to the parents, I know has been hard, but I'm always very appreciative of them.
Thanks, Anne. I also know that you have really direct conversations with people and really talk them through what to expect and how to navigate it and what they think they want to do. And that's something I really appreciate about your approach to work is, you don't avoid the conversations, right? I think it's easy to sometimes talk around a thing and you're like, so reunification is happening. What are we going to do?
And that's the best way to support them, is just by being direct.
Yeah. Megan, what about you? How do you approach reunification? What are you thinking about?
We're thinking about, so we have a biological daughter, so we are also thinking about her and supporting her relationships, and our grief, because no matter how happy you are about it, there's grief. And then as far as our foster children, it's dependent on the age. So sometimes for younger kids, the therapists that we've worked with have helped us to make a little book about, here's what's going to happen, and you're going to have overnights, and then you're going to come here, and we mark on the calendar when they're going to be here and when they're going to be with their parents. And then we've been very lucky, because I can imagine, as a biological parent, I can only imagine going through this process, that there would be a really strong urge to just shut this whole part of their life and move on and pretend it never happened. And I am so amazed by the parents of our kids that we've worked with and how open they have been to us staying in their lives. I mean, our little guy who came to us at 9 months was with us for 14 months. We were his first solid attachment. And so for the first, I think about 8 months that he was back home, every single time we said goodbye, he was screaming and crying and had to be pulled away from us. And I can't imagine how hard, I know how hard that was for me. I can't imagine how hard that was for his mom, but she always reached out and said, when can we get together again? Because she knew that that was what was best for her kid. And so, it's really thinking about what they need and working with the support system. So our Amara social workers have had really good advice around how to prepare our kiddos and ourselves. And the therapists that we've worked with for the children, and then the bio parents also have been great about, we'll share, this is what the therapist said, and then they'll say, okay, so how can we make this happen? And it's worked out for us.
Yeah. April, could you share a little bit about what your team is focused on and how you're supporting reunification? And then I just want to let everybody know, we'll move on to our last question after that to end with a little bit of optimism.
I think for us, we're advising our volunteer CASAs to stay in contact with all of the adults, as well as checking with the children, particularly if they're old enough. But we want to make sure, that the biological parents who are being reunified with their kids, and who knows how long that has been that the child's been out of their care, that that it's safe for them to talk about the difficulties they're having with the placement. So that if they need resources, we can sort of immediately put that in place and not wait too long. And this is where I feel like the biological parents' relationship with the foster parents comes into a huge help, because often they're using them for advice in a way that's very natural and does not involve sort of the whole system, right? It doesn't involve everybody having a team meeting where there's 12 of us there looking at them on their Zoom or, in person. And as well as the CASAs are often navigating frequent phone calls from the caregivers who are grieving over the loss of this child they've had in their home for a couple of years. And so the CASA is trying to they're a trained volunteer, but they aren't a professional, right? So they're trying to figure out where to place all this and how the import of it. And for instance, if you hear that a child is screaming at leaving their current caregivers after they've been having multiple overnights with their mom, it's hard not to be reactive. And so we have a lot of conversations about that. And we have MSWs on staff who do work with our CASAs to help them navigate this so that the CASAs can present a calm front when they're advocating for the child and helping in the transition. It's complicated. These are little people, right? And we acknowledge that more than we used to. I also wanted to say that sometimes we have time for these long transitions, but sometimes we also are working under the rubric of a court order that's demanding that we do this in a certain amount of time. And so that can really frame the transition and what we're able to do with the time we have.
Yeah, the reality is sometimes there's a lot of things outside of our control and decision-making. Thank you. So my last question for everyone is, what do you wish more people knew about foster care? Brenda, I'd love to start with you.
Yeah, so what it takes to be a foster care parent is the willingness to do it. And oftentimes people think that they have to have a specific degree, specific profession, background, and that's the only way that they would be qualified. When in reality, we're just looking for, from a caregiver, someone who's looking to actually want to do this and who can create a support system that they'll be able to use, and just be prepared, obviously, for the roller coaster of emotions, which, as much as they can do trainings and all of these things, things do change. And so just having that willingness and open and being flexible with things that are going to happen.
And I'm going to hop back to you, April. What do you wish people knew about foster care, walk away with today?
I think remembering, all of us have to remember our role. With CASA, for example, is just one voice in the courtroom, and foster care by definition is supposed to be temporary. And we're so grateful, of course, as the professionals on the case, when children are in a good home, where it is something we just don't have to worry about that piece. It's so much harder on cases where kids, for example, the placement instability, where they're bumping homes. And sometimes it's due to the children's behavior, and sometimes it's not. It just is really, the kid is just really unlucky for some reason that has led to that. I got to visit a lot of foster homes over 7 years when I was a staff guardian ad litem, and I was consistently amazed at sort of both the love, but also the level of professionalism and skills that these foster parents brought to the table. And I was so grateful for that. And often I had younger children then, I have older children now, but thinking, oh my God, would they take my children? Because, they had so much more experience than I did with this age group. I felt like, oh, can we be friends? Could you advise me? So I think that there are these, if you read the newspaper or even sometimes in court, you hear foster care being spoken of as this terrible thing. And really it's having it be a safe place for our kids is a wonderful thing. And I'm just grateful that it exists.
Thanks, April. Erin, what about you? What do you hope people walk away with?
You know, when we get together these sessions, we talk about like the challenging stuff a lot of times, and sometimes it can get a little bit overwhelming. And I think a lot of things that people don't realize is that most of it is watching movies with pizza and getting ready to go to school and all of those things. So we've heard as foster parents from tons of people just say, I could never do that. And I think the thing that I will want to start saying to people is like, you figure out what you can do really fast once you're in it. And this challenging stuff that's there is there, and it's challenging, and you figure it out pretty quick, the best response and how to proceed forward as a parent. And it's worth it because you can have a lasting impact. You can basically have a niece and nephew for life. And that those kids are worth it.
Thank you. Oh my goodness. So we are running out of time, you guys. Look at how that just blew by. So I'm sorry, Megan, and I'm sorry, Anne. I'm not going to let you answer the question, but I do want to welcome back Scarlett so that she can wrap us up. And I do want to just recognize there were some really great questions in the chat and in the Q&A, and we will, as was noted in the chat, we'll be following up. So we'll send out some stuff, and Scarlett will share more about that.
All right, thank you so much, Nicole, and thank you, Brenda, Anne, April, Erin, and Megan. And thanks to all of you for joining us today and for your questions. As Nicole noted, we will be sending a follow-up email with a link to this recording if you'd like to share it with others, as well as links to resources and action steps, such as the ones that we talked about today. So please look to the chat for some of these links and a link to our website in case you want to learn more, make a gift, sign up for our newsletter, or find other ways that you can get involved, including becoming foster parents. Our spring fundraiser, Together We Thrive, is also coming up soon on Wednesday, May 18th. It will be an in-person outdoors event with a virtual option. Please visit our website to learn more. We'd love to see you there. Thank you again, and stay tuned for invitations to future events in the series. Have a great afternoon.